Welcome back to the Celtics Nation Rise podcast. I'm your host, Griffin Aldridge, and we got a very special guest today. We got Jack Simone, Celtics reporter. Would you like to introduce yourself, kind of give you a background on what you do?
Yeah, of course. Like I said, my name's Jack. I cover the Celtics for Hardwood Houdini right now, which is a website. I have a podcast called How About Them Celtics. And yeah, I mean, I cover the team with other videos and stuff on Twitter and other social media channels. I've been doing it for a couple or few years now, I guess. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so you've kind of been like a celebrity on my TikTok. I've been seeing your clips go around and it's been awesome. Actually, I wanted to say before I even started getting into Celtics content, like I saw all your stuff. So like it's a big thing for me to have you on for sure. I kind of want to ask you, so I love the TikToks kind of where you give a background of what you do in like a day in a life. Could we kind of
Yeah.
share a day in a life of your like a Celtics game?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I mean, the mornings slash afternoons before I leave for the game are pretty normal. I'm just like writing or editing videos or stuff like that at my desk. But I head out relatively early to the general area. So I do like 10,000 steps a day. That's just been my goal lately. So I'll go a little bit early so I can just walk around the city a little bit before the game. So I'll head out of my apartment at like 2:30, depending on the time of the game. I'll take the T in, the green line into the city. I'll walk around for a little bit and then I'll get to the garden early so I can watch warm-ups, then go to the press conferences. The coaches both speak before the game, so I go to Joe Muzzulla, see, the conference press conference for him before the game, then the opposing coach, so whichever away coach is next. Then eat dinner, go upstairs to watch the game, do the pregame show I do with my podcast co-host Sam France. We do that 30 minutes before every game. Then you watch the game, then go back downstairs for all the press conferences of Joe Mazzulla and whatever players are made available that night. Then I record my post-game podcast at that point. If it's like a normal 7:30 tip, it's usually like 11:30, 11:45 by the time I wrap up that. Then I'll go back down, get the tea back home, and then kind of be done from there.
Wow, so definitely a loaded day. I know I have an internship at my school and we had four games in one day and I got there at 10 and didn't leave till 8. So it's definitely an exhausting day. I wanted to say, for people that are trying to go into this industry, what advice do you kind of give for them? And those long, tiring days, obviously, but they're worth it, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, the best advice I have is just do as much work as you can. Like I wasn't even a sports journalist or sports anything major. I was a nursing major at school, and then I was like a teaching major, and then I just graduated with a history degree so I could, graduate college on time. I ended up doing a 1 year master's program in sports communications, so I have that a little bit. But for the most part, like I started like a random blog my junior year of college just to practice writing. And so I would just write for no one to read it just to practice doing it because I enjoyed doing it. I did started the podcast that I have still to this day at like the very end of 2019. And then Sam joined on in like March of that, like 2020, and he's been doing it with me ever since. And so it's kind of just a matter of doing it consistently, even when no one's reading or no one's listening. Because then eventually I applied to write for Celtics blog, which is the SB Nation site, and they said no. And so I was like, okay, I'll try somewhere else. And then I applied for at the Hive, which is the Hornets site, just so I could write about basketball. And they got me in. I got in there through a mutual or like a connection I had, and then or somebody I met on Twitter, and then eventually I, wrote for them. I wrote for a bunch of fan-sided sites, and then eventually Celtics blog. I applied the next time. They said yes, and then they didn't have like a credential of games at that point, but I wrote so much that Keith Smith, who is now working for Spot Track, like messaged me and said, "Hey, have you ever been to games?" I said, "No," and he's like, "We should get you there." And so he helped me make that connection because of just how much I was writing. And so I always tell people like, you need to do the work before anyone asks you to do the work. Like it's kind of just the thing. Like just write as much as you can, apply to as many places in the space that you want to work in, and do the work before the reward is there in front of you. Because you see a lot of people like wait to see the benefit of doing the work before they do it. And in this industry, unfortunately, that's not really how it works. And so I think just writing and putting out as much content as possible is the best way to keep going up.
Yeah. Definitely a competitive industry for sure. Um, I wanted to ask you kind of, so you go to all the interviews and stuff. Do you kind of have a behind the scene funny story, like favorite moments kind of that you could share on here?
Gosh, it's not really behind the scenes anymore, but last season I was asking Joe Mazzulla a question and I kind of like stumbled over my words. I went like, "Hey Joe, how are you? What do you think of this?" And before I could keep going, he like stopped me and he's like, "You didn't even let me answer the question, how are you?" Like he just stopped me in the middle of my question and everyone laughed and it got posted to like Twitter and stuff. So it's not like this behind the scenes story because it's technically out there, but that was me like getting picked on a little bit, which was funny. It's funny in hindsight. It was funny then, but there's nothing you can do but laugh it off. But it was definitely stopped my heart for a second. I was like, oh shoot.
We had Cameron on here and he was saying with
Yeah.
oh he's like a tough one to kind of ask questions with it. It's so funny because you see Joe Mazzulla from like just me a fan point of view, like you see him on the TV and he's just so funny. Like you see those interviews come out. Is that kind of how he is behind the scenes too?
Man, he is he's pretty stone-faced, like in general. Like you can tell he's a very nice guy. Like he just is, but he doesn't care for, BSing. I don't want to swear in here, but like he just tells it how it is, doesn't really care what people think about it. And then it's fine. Like he doesn't really talk too much behind the scenes. Like every once in a while, he'll like say something when he leaves a scrum, and he has a smile on his face. So like he's a nice guy. He is just very much if he's talking to the media, he's going to be what you see on TV.
Oh yeah, it's so funny, and I just love watching his clips because like I remember it was one. What do you like about the new City Edition jerseys? Oh, they say Celtics on them. He's just very.
Yep.
Is that a challenging kind of? Is that challenging sometimes to kind of like because you want to ask him a good question, he makes it just so short. Is that kind
Yeah,
of?
you almost have to phrase your question in a way that you know you're going to get a good answer, or you're asking him something that he wants to and or is willing to talk about. So it's kind of like I don't want to say difficult in that way, but you definitely have to know the way to ask him to get an answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So kind of still on that topic, who is your favorite player to kind of interview with?
Who to interview? I mean, I did an interview before the season on Xavier Tillman, who's not playing much right now, but he is like the nicest person I've ever talked to while covering the team. I'd like talked to him during the finals last year too, and he was just super nice. Like I ended up like just talking to him off the record, like not even about anything, just like, oh, how's it going? How you liking Boston? Whatever for like 20 minutes, and he's just like the most normal dude. So he's awesome. I love him. As far as like any of the guys that come to the podium regularly. Luke's always funny, even though he never talks at the podium, but he's like usually a funny guy when he's in press conferences. But I'd say Kristaps. Kristaps always gives phenomenal answers whenever he's at the podium. You can tell he just like really enjoys, you know, discussing that type of stuff in a press conference. So I think he's probably the top one for me.
Yeah, we had Green Runs Deep on here, and obviously him talking about Porzingis is just great. He's such a nice guy. I was actually able
Mhm.
to go to one of the meet and greets, and I got to meet him. Such a nice guy for sure. Um,
Yeah.
kind of back to Tillman. Do you kind of, I don't know if you talked to him about this, but is he feeling some type of way that obviously he got a lot of time last year and he's been struggling this year? Have you talked to him kind of like
I haven't talked to him about that in specific, but me and Bobby Manning were at a community event that he was at a couple months ago, and we talked to him about like where he was at. Like I think he asked him like if he regretted re-signing in Boston at all, and he was just like, no, obviously not. Like I'm on the defending champions. Why would I regret that? Like I love it. So I do think there's part of it that he looks hurt a little bit, and he's been on the injury report. So I don't think he's completely right now. I also just think he is happy to be where he is and happy to be on the team he's on. He talked about some of his three-point struggles and the willingness to shoot and sort of getting rid of old habits where he would pump fake and drive and stuff like that. So. I don't think he regrets it. I don't think he's unhappy with anything. I think he sort of understands the position he's in because, like, even though he's not playing the best right now, even if he was playing at the highest level, he would still have a lot of guys in front of him. So I think he's just grateful to be on this team and, on a team that just won a championship and is fighting for another one.
Oh yeah, historic franchise. I want to kind of now kind of get into last night and like how the Celtics have been playing recently. Obviously, historic night from Peyton Pritchard and Derek White being the first Celtics to both have 40 points in the same game. What was kind of your opinion on last night? How do you feel about last night's game?
It was a great game. It was fun. I'm actually doing a video on the threes right now from White and Pritchard. It was just the way they got their threes was is what was most impressive to me. Like they were coming off screens, they were, running in transition, they were coming off the catch, they were creating for themselves, but also running off the ball. It was just, it was a crazy display of shot making, and they really bullied sort of what Portland was trying to do on defense. Jalen obviously didn't play very well, but even he was drawing like double teams or two bodies at once, and that would lead to open shots for Pritchard and Derek White. And Portland played well too. Like they had a good offensive game. They just couldn't hang on defense when two guys are hot like that. So seeing Pritchard and Derek White make that many threes in a game is something that probably won't happen again for a while. And for all I know, it'll happen tonight as we're recording this because like who knows anymore with this team. But it was wild to see two guys as hot as they were in person.
Yeah, that's a great thing. So I was actually thinking about going to that game, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's kind of like a tough one." But how was the crowd last night? With obviously the Trailblazers, how was it?
So good. I mean, they that was one of the better crowds I've seen all season. I think they recognized like the moment. I think they recognized how hot Pritchard and White were, and so they were just like they really wanted to see them make history, and they eventually did with like first two teammates to hit nine or more threes or whatever it was in a game, and career highs for both of them. So like you could tell that they knew what was happening, and they knew how cool what was happening was.
That's incredible. I've asked this question a lot to our guests who've been at the Garden, and you're at the Garden all the time. So, kind of, how were the vibes this year compared to last year? Like, how
Hmm.
is it? Do you think they're better this year? Got work on some stuff? How are the vibes at the Garden?
It's interesting. I always think it's a weird. I think the crowd is have been relatively better this year. I think what happens when you have a team as good as the Celtics are, the expectations are so high that it's hard for the crowd to get into it a lot of the time because like they just expect the Celtics to win by 50. And so they're not as excited if they're in a close game against a team like the Hawks or a team like the Rockets. Like if they don't think the team is good enough to compete with the Celtics, they won't be as excited. But like you look at that Cavs game and everyone was pumped up. You looked at last night's game where they're winning by enough so like the crowd can get into some of the other stuff happening in the game. So I think there have been some really good crowds this season, more so than there were last year. So I definitely think it's better. But I also think it's harder for crowds of like really good teams like this, where the expectations are already so high to get into as much. But like then you look at the Thunder and the Cavs, like they were supposed to be good, but they weren't supposed to be this good. And so the crowds are like amped up every night because they're defying expectations every single game. Celtics don't really have the benefit of that because the expectations are already so high. But I do think the highest of highs this season have been better than the crowds last year.
Yeah, I definitely got to get to a game because I'm actually from Maine. I go to a bunch of Maine Celtics games, so it's a lot
Yeah.
different. Get to interview a lot of the players there, which is really cool, and that's been fun. But I kind of want to ask too. Obviously, the season's wrapping up, and with Drew Holiday with his injury and just kind of injury management, where are you on that standpoint? Have you heard anything with Drew Holiday, or what's your kind of thing on getting players rest to be healthy for playoffs? What's your standpoint on that?
Yeah, we don't know too much. Joe Muzzulla said at practice the other day, maybe yesterday, shoot around that through like practice with the team, he went through stuff, he was shooting a little bit. So it sounds like it's the type of thing where he could play through it if he needed to. I wouldn't expect to see him play for a little while. He said a couple weeks ago, or maybe last week, that he's not going to get surgery. So I think it's just going to be a manage the pain type of thing. Maybe he'll get something done in the off season, but I don't know how much you see him down the stretch of the regular season. I think they'll try to be pretty cautious with him heading into the playoffs. Maybe you see him get a few games in here and there just to keep up his form, but I think it'll just be something they manage until the playoffs, and then from there he'll play through whatever pain is left over.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing with Drew Holiday, we were talking about this on Celtics Talk Weekly last night, is kind of, you need him when you come to playoffs, and shooting, obviously, that's a big factor of his game. Like, definitely, you've seen him have great shooting games with Milwaukee, but at Boston, he's kind of more so a defensive player, and they want him to pass the ball, cause havoc on defense. So that's something could he realistically do with his finger being hurt during playoffs? Yeah, probably, but you just still want to be safe. One thing I did want to ask too is kind of what are your expectations for the Celtics throughout the rest of this remaining regular season going into playoffs?
For the regular season, it's a little tough because you have to imagine they'll sit some guys some more. I mean, I think after this homestand, after they got the Lakers, Philly, Utah, and Thunder, I think are the last ones left. So they got four games against outside of the Jazz and Philly. So Lakers and Thunder are going to be tough games, but then they got a pretty easy schedule, relatively speaking, down the rest of the stretch of the season. So I think they'll put together a pretty good stretch. I don't think they'll catch the Cavs. I think that's pretty out of the realm of possibility right now. But I also don't think they'll fall back in behind the Knicks. I think they'll just coast in the 2 seed and then go into the playoffs hopefully feeling good.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing too is kind of we've already talked about this, but kind of injury management. With Porzingis, it's been, illness, but you got to think about like it's just resting players, and because you want to go into playoffs healthy. And that's just like a main concern. And for me personally, I would rather see a healthy Celtics team than see them kind of like blow some of these games. Like I that's like in my aspect, like I think that's kind of fine. Like I just want to see a great playoff run. Um, what are your expectations for playoffs? What do you obviously the goal is banner 19. Like that's the ultimate goal, making a dynasty. What do you want to see and how do we got to get there?
Oh man, it's tough. I think as long as they keep their, I don't know how much extra they have to do other than just play the basketball that has gotten them to this point. Like, I think they're really good at, getting mismatches they want. I think they're a defensive team that doesn't have a lot of holes in it. So I think if they just play straight up defense and straight up, you know, um, offense the way they've been playing, they should be able to find. I think you'll see a lot of picking on mismatches in the playoffs, whether it's Darius Garland or Karl-Anthony Towns or anything like that. I think they'll be able to get to the spots and the shots that they want to. And then defensively, I think it's just a matter of playing straight up and keeping the best defensive lineups on the floor. And they've built the team to withstand that. And so obviously you've got good teams like the Cavs and then the Knicks and whoever you see out west, obviously they could potentially see in the finals if they get there. But I think if they just play straight up basketball, they're best equipped to win the championship anyways. So,
Yeah, who do you think is their biggest threat if you had to say?
um, probably Thunder. I mean, and unless you're talking about just the East, then I think it's the Cavs. I know that's a pretty straightforward answer, but I think the Pacers are the only other team in the East outside of the Cavs that could give them trouble, and I don't think they could beat them in a playoff series. I think they would just play them tough. So I'd go with those as the top teams, just because I think the Cavs and the Thunder. The Cavs have a good enough offense and a good enough star in Donovan Mitchell to make tough shots and a good enough, overall team to get there. The Thunder have a very well built defense with a star at the helm, and then the Pacers just play them really tough always, and their high powered offense sort of gets them into these shootout games. So I think those are the three top guys for me.
I wanted to add on to that too. I kind of said, in a sense, kind of like with that Pacers kind of standpoint, I think the Pistons are also like kind of one that could, mix in a little few games.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that.
Pistons are good, man. I don't think they could beat the Celtics in a playoff series, but they're a good team. They obviously just beat Boston, so that's fresh in everyone's mind. And they've got a young, hungry team looking to win. But I don't know how much I trust those type of young teams in the playoffs as much. But they definitely make some noise. And if they get the right matchup in the first round, who knows what could happen?
And it's one with the Pistons, I feel like that it's kind of going back to old Pistons. Now, I don't think, like you said, I don't think they would beat Boston in a 7 game series, but I feel like they could get a win or two. Like they're definitely a team that's hungry and they're gonna compete, especially when they get more people and kind of build their team up more. I think they could be a tough team for sure. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So one other thing I wanted to say is kind of what has been your favorite game you went to this season or favorite
Man,
moment from this season? If
from
you
this
want to give a
season.
couple, I'm all on board for it.
Oh, that's tough. Last night's game was really fun. I'm trying to think of some games that I'm forgetting. I have such bad memory. I need to look at like their schedule to like jog my memory of like who has done what in these games and stuff like that. Let me see. Celtics. I'm just gonna pull up the schedule here to see what I'm forgetting because I'm definitely forgetting stuff. Um, Man, that's a good question though. The Toronto game where Tatum hit the game winner was pretty fun. That Cleveland game was a lot of fun, even though they lost. Like that was a really entertaining game. Um, so I think that one had a lot of juice to it. That one was really good. Um, Past that, Christmas wasn't as fun because they lost. Uh, Man, that Cleveland game, I know they lost, but if they had won, that probably would have been the most fun game. The crowd was into it. The Celtics were getting, really fun mismatches and switches on every single possession, it felt like. So that was a cool one. The Minnesota game was really good this year too, where they won by two at home. Um, but man, if they had won that Cleveland game, I think that would have been the most fun game of the year.
I'm gonna I'm gonna say the exact same thing. I agree. I was so hyped up during that game, and
Mhm.
my TV, I couldn't even hear the announcers from how loud it was. It was
Yeah.
incredible. And that broke my heart when they lost, obviously. Because I was so into the game. I was jumping up and down. I'm like, oh, the neighbors are gonna yell at me, but it's worth it, you know? And then obviously it was just a downward slope from that timeout the Cavs called in the first,
Yeah.
like it, we were up 23, I think. No, 25-3 or something
Something
like.
crazy. Yeah.
They called the timeout and then just the energy shifted completely. Like
Mhm.
it was, but great game from Tatum and Brown. Obviously, that was incredible. Just a great night. That would have, exactly, that would have been a signature win. That would have been amazing. The win of the season for sure. Do you think that hurts them in playoffs, kind of going in 2-2? Do you think that gives it more of a fight, or what do you think?
I think it depends on health, right? Because like if KP and Drew don't play the playoffs, then you maybe you see something similar. I do think the Celtics are also just capable of throwing better looks out there, and I think they learned from that game. But like realistically, and this is not a shot at the Cavs. I think the Cavs are an amazing basketball team. Like if Drew and KP are healthy, Sam Hauser's not on the floor, so they can't attack that mismatch like they were in that game. So I think having KP and Drew would change a lot for a series like that. So I still think the Celtics would be favored in the series if healthy. If those guys aren't healthy, I think I'd still probably take the Celtics, but it would be more of like a 7 game series rather than a shorter game series. Like it'd be really, really, really close. But I do think having Drew and KP would change a lot.
Oh yeah, and I think just especially having Drew Holiday is like important. Like we learned how to play without Porzingis last year, obviously in the playoffs, but Drew Holiday, he's been a key asset to this team, I feel like, in a sense, you know? Um, One thing I did kind of want to ask too, oh, I forgot the question. It was a great question too. Um, but kind of what player, all right, back to kind of on what has Porzingis said that kind of stood out to you, something funny during
Hmm.
post game or something like that?
Man, it's not as much like the funniness. He is just very like thoughtful with his responses. Like you'll ask him a question, not that the other guys aren't. Like everyone's really good at the podium. There's no guys on the roster who are like bad at answering questions. They're all very like good at giving solid responses, but he is just very like you can tell he enjoys getting asked good questions. If you ask something he finds interesting, be like, oh, that's a good question. Like that's good. Like I and he'll like really think about the way he wants to answer. And so I think it's just his personality mixed with his openness. And I think part of it comes from like he's been in media situations where like Washington probably doesn't have as, much media as Boston does, or Dallas, obviously, he was in a spot where he was getting criticized a lot. So now that he's in a place where he's in a unique position and it's the city loves him and a lot of the questions are like about his game and what he's done to adapt and like the situation and very positive stuff. I think he just relishes in that a little bit more. And so I think all of that mixed together with his very pretty bubbly personality in general leads to like some really thoughtful responses from him at the podium.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll ask you just a couple more questions and get
Mhm.
you out of here because I know you busy game day. Um, so my question is, what drew you to the Celtics? Like, have you always been a big fan? What drew you to this team?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm from Massachusetts, so I grew up a Celtics fan. I'm from Easton, Mass, which is like 40 minutes south of Boston, and I was a baseball kid growing up because my dad liked baseball a lot.
So
But
Red Sox.
then yeah, exactly. Red Sox guy. Someone's horn is going off. Yeah, that's on my apartment. Sorry for that. So I was a Red Sox guy. I still like the Red Sox, obviously. I like all Boston sports, but once I hit like middle school and high school, I started watching the Celtics a bit more. It was actually Jeff Green was my first favorite player. So that's like right around where I started watching basketball a lot was Jeff Green, the Jeff Green Celtics. I thought he was like next. He was not next, but that's sort of like how I got into it. Unfortunately, post '08 championship, but then it was the Jeff Green, it was the, Avery Bradley, Isaiah Thomas teams, and then IT, obviously, and then going into the Jason Tatum, et cetera, from there on out.
That's awesome. So one other question I have too is kind of if you had that's what it was. Sorry, before I forget. Uh Kind of so being a Celtics fan and also working for the Celtics, I know sometimes for me when I have my job, I get into the games and stuff. How is it kind of, how do you separate your emotions and kind of like you're not like trying to get hyped, or can you get hyped with the position that you do like during the game?
Yeah. So it's It's kind of weird. Like the more I've like covered the team, the less of a fan I've become. Not that I'm like there'll always be a part of me like being from Boston, being from the city that like roots for them a little bit. Like it's hard to kick that, but for the most part, I just enjoy watching like the game itself. Like I find myself rooting less for the Celtics to win and rooting more for like good, fun stuff to talk about. Which is like a weird thing. Like when I started, I just was always like expecting I would have to fight the urge to be a fan, but like now I'm kind of just like not indifferent, but like kind of like closer to indifferent than fully rooting. So like a lot of us sit up on the ninth floor, like me, Cam, and some other guys as well. And there's obviously like the first floor media as well. Like there's like levels to it. And so we'll sit up there and we'll like smile or we'll see something cool and we'll be like, oh look at that. But it's less like, oh look the Celtics are winning and more like oh my gosh, look at how they just, attack that switch, or look at that, look at how he rotated over for that block. It's more like cool stuff rather than like rooting for the team itself. So it kind of naturally like fades away a little bit, the fandom, as you're around the team and covering the team, because you can't be like that. And so it's more of like rooting for storylines and rooting for cool stuff to happen than like rooting for the team itself.
That's incredible. So, two more questions and I'll let you go.
Mhm.
Um, First one is kind of what is your all top five starting five? Like if you give your starting
Oh
five
man,
from a fan perspective, or like if you want to just give an all-time Celtics top five.
Celtics. Okay, so I'm much less of a history buff than a lot of people. So I'm going to pick a
Right.
lot of recent players, and people might not like that. But I'm going to put Jeff Green in there just because he's my favorite, and he was my first favorite Celtic. So it's funny. I'll put Jeff Green. I used to be people hate it, but I used to be a huge Grant Williams fan. So for the sake of making people mad, and I like him, I'll put him in there too. I'll put Derek White at the one because I loved him. I'll just do Derek and Marcus as the backcourt because obviously I love Marcus Smart. And then that would leave me, I would need a center, I think. So who would I'm trying to think. I'll put Al at the center. I'll throw Al at the five. I think that's a safe bet. So it's a very recent team. But like since I started really covering the Celtics, those have been some of my favorites. And I think I was considering Daniel Tice too, but I'll put Horford there.
I love that five. So that actually makes me want to ask one more question too. So I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
two more questions and we'll finish it up. What was your opinion on the whole Grant Williams situation where
Hmm.
he kind of trucked Tatum? What was your thoughts and opinions on that? And kind of like
Uh
asked him to dinner after, like what?
yeah, asking him to dinner after was a little bit wild. Like he wasn't like you got to know the moment at that point. It is what it is. Like he did it. I didn't think like it was definitely like he was trying not to let him get a shot off. He was trying to, mess with him, bump him a little bit. I don't think it's the type of thing where every single Celtics fan should just hate Grant Williams. No, I think that's a little silly. I think that's who Grant Williams is, right? Like that's a Dylan Brooks play. That's a Draymond Green play. Like that's what Grant Williams is. That is the type of player he is be like trying to be, and like this enforcer, like I'm a do whatever, like get my team fired up, whatever type of guy. And if he was on the Celtics and he did that, everyone would be like, "Oh, it's fine. Who cares?" So like if he's doing that on another team, like you have to sort of understand that context. But obviously he's not going to get dinner with you after that, Grant. Like, come on, like
No.
have a little, yeah.
Yeah, that's too funny. So last question I want to ask. Winning the championship last year was so surreal. Do you have any fun stories to share about
Hmm.
winning the championship or the parade? I went to the parade. Kind of, I want to hear your whole thing about the championship. Stories
Yeah,
or
so it was fun. I was at the Garden till like 5:30 in the morning that night, just like or that morning, I guess, just hanging out and writing and working and like relishing in how it happened. And it was a lot of just like being there in the aftermath was really cool. Like you saw a bunch of like Tiki Garden workers eating pizza out on the court on the stage where they just like get the trophy. All the guys were like in and out of like the locker room and like next door or whatever they were doing. So like you saw a couple of the players and people walking around. I know Nemish Queta like walked onto the court and dapped up Justin Turpin, who's another reporter, just like slapped him on the stomach and like gave him a little like high five and said, "Hey, what's up?" So it was just like there's not many like fun like stories. It's just a cool environment to like to be in that spot and to see everything going on, and to like see all these like people you recognize, all these players and Mike Zarin and Brad Stevens and Joe Muzzulla and all of the like coaches and everyone just like kind of walking around like completely guard down, and like you don't like you're obviously not gonna go up and like ask them a bunch of questions or like press them or whatever, but just like being in that moment, seeing them like being able to like let their guard down in the sense of like the job is finished, like we finally did it, like type of way. Like it was just a really cool thing to get to witness and experience.
That's incredible. Did you get a picture with the Larry? I got one at Portland Expo. Did you get one with the Larry?
I did not. No, I don't think I did, but it was cool to see up close.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining. I'd love to have you on this
Mhm.
off season. We're gonna do a bunch of content, so we'll figure it out. Or playoffs, we'll get you back on. Well, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. Everyone, make sure to like and subscribe. Go check him out. I'll leave the description links in the description down below. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.